2011. It has been a year of tragedy, a year of conflict, a year of reflection, and for some, a year of hope. From the tsunami in Japan to uprisings in the Mideast, the Wall Street Journal spent the year keeping you in the know. Now we're going to take a look back at some of the most important news and events of the year. It was 1 week into the year when our nation was rocked by a deadly shooting in Tucson, Arizona.
911, where's your emergency? I know in Oracle there's been a shooting at Safeway.
6 people were killed, including a 9-year-old girl.
A gunman approached and started shooting.
Is anybody injured? Did you say Gabrielle Gifford was hit?
I do believe Gabrielle Gifford was hit.
A man approached her, shot her point blank in the head.
The accused Arizona shooter due in court in Phoenix to face murder charges.
I never thought I would experience something like this in my own backyard.
Let's use this occasion to expand our moral imaginations.
She is beginning to stand with assistance. She's scrolling through an iPad. These are all fantastic advancements forward.
Gabby opened her eyes for the first time.
Yesterday was an important step in Gabby's recovery.
And means so much to our country than to witness the return of our colleague, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
From Arizona to the Middle East, when Tunisian fruit vendor Mohamed Bouazizi lit himself on fire, he set in motion a series of uprisings in the Mideast, still affecting the region.
All of a sudden, Tunisia, then you have Libya, then you have Bahrain, then you have Egypt. Unrest in Tunisia and the country's president flees to Libya.
This is the first time that in the Arab world, mass public protests have overturned a government.
A third straight day of protests in Bahrain today, Kelly.
Bahrain's military had left the streets. They began to march.
Protests have spread to Yemen.
We haven't seen numbers like this before in Yemen.
Yemen's president to step down after 33 years. Syria opens fire on protesters.
Thousands of Egyptian anti-government protesters are clashing with police.
The Egyptian government has an important opportunity at this moment in time to implement political, economic, and social reforms.
Protesters, overpowered them, the security forces. The protesters have held and moved past Tahrir Square.
Egyptian President Mubarak fires his own cabinet.
How much further do you think the Mubarak regime can hold out?
I think we've passed a tipping point in terms of the protest here.
And so just about half an hour ago, Vice President Suleiman came on state TV and said President Hosni Mubarak has decided to step down.
You saw euphoria in the square.
Egyptians are headed to the elections in the first of what is actually quite a drawn-out election process.
The turnout is quite large. There's a lot of enthusiasm for these first elections since the revolution.
In Libya, protests were not enough. When Muammar Gaddafi's oppressive regime threatened to crush the revolution, a coalition of Western nations had no choice but to intervene.
Pro-democracy movements in Tunisia and in Egypt is starting to have a domino effect.
An escalating crisis in Libya.
We're seeing protests against Gaddafi for the first time.
Nothing is off the table.
Could the U.S. and Europe stand by as he kind of finished his advance across Libya?
What do we need to know about this no-fly zone?
Well, President Obama said today it's still an option.
We cannot stand idly by when a tyrant tells his people that there will be no mercy.
A resolution was passed to authorize military airstrikes in Libya.
Who gave you the right to intervene in our internal affairs?
An international coalition involving the United States has begun a targeted campaign of missile strikes aimed at subduing the air defenses of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi.
Last night was pretty intense here. We heard a lot of explosions.
95% of Libya is now under rebel control. The city was quite easily overrun, kind of similar to what happened in Baghdad.
Muammar Gaddafi has been killed, this according to reports out of Libya, both from the Prime Minister and from rebel forces.
People have been crying with happiness. People have been shouting with joy. 42 years of the dictator are over, they say.
But protests this year were not isolated to the Mideast.
Our
poor economic circumstances and discontent permeated the globe. In August, it was Londoners who took to the streets for 4 consecutive nights of looting, arson, and lawlessness.
England braces for another night of violence.
London police have increased their police presence by almost threefold. The police called it last night the worst night on memory for the city.
And in Greece, dissatisfied citizens began rioting as their quiet country became the unlikely epicenter of the European debt crisis.
Greece literally is on fire.
There were rocks being thrown, paving stones broken up and used as projectiles, firebombs.
A lot of denial about how bad the situation in Greece is. There is no growth in Greece. The economy is shrinking.
EU leaders said they would do whatever it takes to ensure that Greece doesn't default.
When does this end?
How is this ultimately going to get Greece to a situation where it can pay back its debts now and get back towards a more stable budget position?
The focus of the investing world will definitely be on Athens.
But debt troubles hit both sides of the Atlantic this year. Here in the U.S., a deadlocked Congress nearly caused the nation to default on its debt as lawmakers struggled to reach a compromise to raise the national debt ceiling.
The debt battle moves to Capitol Hill.
Are they getting closer to a deal to raise the debt ceiling?
Republicans are more interested in trying to embarrass the president than doing what's right for the country.
What you got now are dueling plans, a Republican plan over in the House, a Democratic plan in the Senate.
It's going to start to be very late to get to do an orderly process in the Congress on whatever it is that anyone wants to do.
Yeah, I spent 25 years in Washington. I have never seen it this bad.
This is going to cost us for decades if they screw this up.
I hold in my hands the text of the Budget Control Act agreement.
The leaders of both parties and the president have agreed on something, the details of which are still not completely public.
This legislation reflects a bipartisan negotiation over the weekend.
We finally reached a resolution in the only way we could, through an agreement between both parties.
Washington has avoided a catastrophe.
The initial reaction is good, good, no disaster.
The likelihood is that this gets done tonight.
Congress has now approved a compromise to reduce the deficit and avert a default that would have devastated our economy.
But even that compromise was not enough to stop ratings agency S&P from downgrading U.S. debt for the first time in history.
4 hours after the market closed, S&P, the credit rating agency, downgraded the U.S. for the first time ever.
It's about the difficulty of all sides in finding a consensus around fiscal policy choices.
S&P saying it's precisely this process and the lack of real agreement on it that is one of the reasons why they see problems for the U.S. going forward.
It is lack of leadership.
And we didn't need a rating agency to tell us that the gridlock in Washington over the last several months has not been constructive.
And later in the year, the same partisan divides which divided Congress on the debt deal paralyzed the super committee created in that agreement.
Well, the failure of the super committee leaves both parties set for a long debate over taxes and deficits.
I don't think there's any way to resolve the issues on the table now except to have a national election about them.
I'm just curious, what's the impact going to be?
There's going to be, already has been and will be even more so now, a great deal of American disgust.